Welcome to the Be Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. Hey, before I get into the heart of today's episode, I want to take a moment to talk about Wander Tours. You've likely heard me talk about the tours I lead to various destinations. Sometimes I record the conversations you hear while I'm away on a tour, and sometimes, like right now, I record the intro and the outro while I'm traveling. And that's why the recording might sound just a bit different today. Today, I'm recording in Lima, Peru. I'm in my hotel room. I'm on the very first leg of a month-long journey where I'm leading a group on the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. You're jealous, aren't you? I know. After that, I'm taking a group, many of the same people who are here with me in Peru. I'm taking a group to the Galapagos Islands. This is what I do, and it's a pretty good gig. Of course, I love the travel aspect of it. I love being on the road and experiencing new cultures. It is just who I am. But what I've come to love almost as much as the travel itself is the transformative nature that travel has on a person. Not just me, not just the changes that happen to me when I'm traveling, but I get to watch transformations happen to other people, to my tour participants. Many of the tours I lead are women only, and I can't tell you the number of women I've seen who become literally changed through these experiences. It is so special for me. They're doing things they never dreamed of, such as hiking to 11,000 feet to see tiger's nest in Bhutan, or they travel through Southeast Asian countries for the first time, like Vietnam or Indonesia, and they get to meet the local people, and we do homestays, we do cooking classes, and we learn about the culture and the cuisine there. Now, they might even go stand-up paddleboarding for the first time, like in the Galapagos, or like the folks on this trip, we're going to hike up Machu Picchu, and it's going to be amazing. When we return home from travel, we are just not the same. We've had a wonderful time, of course, but we've also pushed ourselves. We've opened ourselves up. We've explored inside and out, and we take home memories and experiences that have made us stronger. That's why I'm so passionate about travel. And that's why I want you to join me on a future Wander Tour, because I know how much it will change your life, because the sights, the activities, and the other really amazing like-minded people on the tour whom you'll get to travel with and bond with, all of these just make up an incredible time. Now, I have a few spots available on our women-only South India tour that starts in late February. And I have just a couple of spots available on our co-ed trip to Papua New Guinea next August. And that centers around the Mount Hagen Sing Sing, which you've likely heard me talk about. I also have a Mount Kilimanjaro trek that departs in January. And we may be able to squeeze you on that tour at this point, but you've got to act super quick if you want to do Tanzania Mount Kilimanjaro trek. Now, these tours do tend to sell out quickly. My Ireland tour, I just announced that like a month ago, and it sold out within 2 weeks, and that's for the fall of 2019. So these tours are popular. When there's space, you gotta grab a spot. Now, you just can't wait. Just think that you're going to hop on board at the last minute. You have to take action. You've got to join the group and do something that will change your life. You've got to just jump on board right now. Go to wandertours.com. That's WANDER, wandertours.com for a complete list of the tours that are available, or send me a note at beth@wandertours.com to let me know which destinations you're interested in, and I'll let you know the next time we do one or if there's still space available. Okay, on to today's conversation. I want to first give fair warning that I discuss sensitive topics today with my guest, Natalia Koss Vallejo. These are topics that may be a trigger for some, and for others, they may just be things you're not comfortable listening to with children in the room, or you may just not be comfortable listening to it at all. So let's just say these are adult topics, okay? So fair warning. Natalia Koss Vallejo is an activist and feminist. And although she's motivated by her anger, you wouldn't know it from her demeanor. She's a diminutive woman with a lion's roar about the issues she cares about. And she isn't shy at all about jumping right into sensitive topics, as you'll hear. Topics that are generally just not talked about publicly. In this episode, we talk about how Natalia got involved with politics at a very early age. That involvement, which you'll hear about, rose out of her difficulty in obtaining an abortion in her late teens. It was at this time that she recognized an unjust and unfair system that affected not only her, but the many women out there in similar situations. This is what I find so amazing and so bold about her, that she was so mature at such a young age to not only recognize this, but to also be so motivated to make changes to the system. Her frustration with this experience launched her into work at Planned Parenthood, NARAL, and ultimately into politics. Although this is a topic she passionately talks about, that's not what actually brought us together. The way Natalia landed on my radar was because of a sexual harassment and workplace misconduct suit. And it was actually something that was filed by a third party, but on behalf of Natalia. And it was against her boss, Bailey Stober. He was, at the time, chair of the King County Democrats in Washington State. You'll hear how this all unfolded, but in short, the complaint, again, filed by a third party, resulted in an internal trial against Stober and caused him to not only lose his position as the chair of the King County Democrats, but also his full-time job at the King County Assessor's Office. Now, this is a guy who said some pretty deplorable things to Natalia, things that shouldn't be said out loud in the first place, let alone by an employer to his employee. And again, fair warning, we actually speak these words out loud in our conversation, so brace yourself. Natalia and I had been trying to get together for months for this conversation, but it took on new urgency after the Senate confirmed Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. After Christine Blasey Ford bravely came forward and, was basically shut down, I felt it was really important for people to hear Natalia's story. But you have to understand that on one hand, Natalia's story is a win for women in the workplace, but you still have to wonder why this is still tolerated and why more women don't come forward in these situations. I'm so glad Natalia also felt it important to get her story out on the Be Bold podcast and that she made time to sit down with me just a couple of days before I left for Peru. So with that, please enjoy this conversation with Natalia Koss Vallejo. Hopefully, you'll find some inspiration to act on what you feel truly passionate about. What brought you to politics?
Oh my gosh.
Of all things.
My abortion.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's
okay.
all comes full circle.
Let me see. 10 seconds in, we're going to get right down to the right down to the issues, to the big issues.
I don't waste time.
No, you don't. Thank goodness. So what did happen in terms of that? Let's just get right into it. Why an abortion? How did that bring you into politics?
Yeah. So I was 17 years old when I got pregnant and had to have an abortion. And
where were you at the time?
The state of Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I'm born and raised. You can probably hear it in my voice a little bit. Wisconsin. So in Wisconsin, it's very difficult to get an abortion. It's one of the states where there are a lot of superfluous kind of loopholes that they make young women jump through. And there's a lot of things like mandatory counseling sessions that if you don't want or feel that you need them, you still have to go do it. In my case, also because I was a minor, I would have needed to get my parents' consent in order to access abortion care, and I didn't feel comfortable doing that. So then I also had to go to court and get a judicial bypass, which was where a judge says, okay, you're allowed to have an abortion. You can make up your own mind without your parents.
How much time did that take?
It took me about 2 months to get all my ducks in a row. And as you can imagine, when you're trying to get an abortion within the first trimester, and then you have all this paperwork to do and all these appointments to make, it cuts pretty close to the deadline. So for me, I got my abortion on the last day possible that it would have been legal in the state of Wisconsin.
Holy mackerel. So they probably make it that way. They make it difficult for that very reason.
Exactly.
Because by the time you find out you're pregnant, you're probably 6 weeks in, right?
Yep, exactly.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So then you became an activist because you wanted to be a pro-choice activist and get involved in politics in that way. So what was the next step in terms of that?
The next step, I would say, was sharing my story, which was transformative for me. I kept my abortion a secret for about a year after I had it. And then there was one point in my poor mother, I was so angry at her at the time. But now looking back, it's one of these moments where I have so much empathy for her. There was a time in my senior year of high school where I was kind of, wilding out. It was my naughty years, and my mom found out that I had been out drinking, and she found marijuana in my room. And I also got sick with a UTI that week, and she was taking care of me and doing all these things and trying to discipline me. And it was that week where she found my diary laying out on my bed one day, and she read it, and she found out that I had had an abortion. And I'm sure you can imagine that I felt very violated in my privacy. Yeah. But at the same time, looking back at it, gosh, I just feel so bad for her as a mom. I mean, can you imagine?
Yeah.
Weed, alcohol, first STI, and then finding out that your daughter had an abortion all in the same week.
Well, yeah, I can see all of that happening at the same time. Must have been like almost heart attack inducing. But what year was that?
That would have been 2005.
Okay. I feel like I'm not a mom, so I don't know. But it feels like things are so different now that the way that I see moms parenting, particularly their daughters, maybe their sons too, is that stuff is just openly talked about. Maybe not the abortion, but the weed and the drinking and anything else that's going on is pretty open.
I think it really depends, though. I think we're getting there, but I don't think we are there yet.
And maybe not in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I think it depends on your family and your background and their values and where you live and whether you have a good relationship with your parents or not. One of the reasons that I think getting the judicial bypass in order to get an abortion is it's a law that is atrocious is because there are some children who are facing abuse in the home, sometimes sexual abuse in the home. And should they have to ask their parents for permission to get an abortion if their parents are the ones abusing them? Hell no. So I think you're right that our culture is getting there, but not all families are there yet. And there's some kids who are growing up in homes where they can't talk to their parents about alcohol or drugs or pregnancy. And I should clarify, my parents are great and I have a great relationship with them. The reason I felt like I couldn't tell them about my pregnancy was because I didn't want to disappoint them. And so that really politicized me at a young age. I was still in high school. I had to raise over $700 to get the procedure done in a matter of weeks and had to go through all of these hoops. And that really politicized me because that was the first time in my young adult life where I saw laws impacting me directly. And the same lawmakers that were trying to make it difficult for me to access an abortion were the same ones who were trying to get rid of sex ed in my high school. They were the same ones who were trying to make it so it's more challenging to get birth control, if you're under 18. They're the same ones who were trying to defund Planned Parenthood so I couldn't afford the birth control that I needed. So I saw a big hypocrisy in the laws that were being created mostly by men that said, well,
And this is when you were 18?
So I had the abortion when I was 17.
Right.
Yeah.
But this awareness came just shortly after that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, about a year after. So when my mom read my diary, it really opened me up to sharing my story because I thought, well, shit. She's the one that I didn't want to hear about. Right. So now that she knows, I'm going to tell everyone. And that changed my life.
How did you go about telling people? I mean, I can understand telling your friends. Did you write an article for the school newspaper, or did you go to the legislature, or did you go, did you start in politics immediately, or what? Like, what was that process like?
It was a short road to politics. It didn't take me very long. It definitely started with just sharing with friends. And of course, at that time as an 18-year-old young woman, I was starting to get to know folks who were in college or doing activism in other ways. And after just talking to friends at parties or at school about my experience, I eventually made a new friend named Amanda, and she was working at Planned Parenthood at the time. And she said, hey, we need activists to share their stories. We need people to testify in Madison, which is the state capital of Wisconsin. And we need people to write letters to the editor and write op-eds in the Journal Sentinel and the big newspapers. And I said, sign me up. And so I joined a group called the Healthy Youth Coalition, and I joined a bunch of other young folks who were making their voices heard.
What gave you the confidence at that age to put yourself out there like that? Like, what was your upbringing in your household? Do you have siblings?
Mm-hmm.
How many?
I have an older sister.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Was she supportive of what you were doing? Or
she was very supportive.
Crazy.
Well, she was very supportive, and I think my parents were cautiously supportive. I think they were a little scared. I think it can be hard for parents to see their child becoming an adult and accepting that their child has sexuality and is making those decisions, and also that they might be going out into a harsh and critical and scary world and being so vulnerable.
Well, were they concerned about their own reputation?
No, that never came up.
No kidding. Huh.
They're I love my parents. They're pretty supportive.
Yeah, that is.
And I've been hard on them too, because usually when I share my story, I talk about the fact that my parents, they didn't have the sex talk with me at home, which is part of why I got pregnant. And, nobody taught them how to talk about those things either.
How were you so bold and so confident in terms of putting yourself out there at such a young age?
Yeah, I mean, there's a very simple answer for that, Beth, which is that I was really, really furious. And I think that anger can be toxic, and we shouldn't hold on to anger all the time, but it's also very useful fuel for when you need to get something done. And I was very angry for a couple of years there. I was angry that these people who I don't know, these elected officials, made decisions that impacted me negatively and made it a really challenging experience for me. I was angry that my school failed me and didn't provide adequate sex ed at an early enough age, to where it was relevant. I'm sorry, but getting sex ed when you're already 17 or 18 is not going to cut it. Mm-hmm. I had a lot of anger. And that's
what fueled it.
Yeah, that's what fueled it and gave me the confidence to speak publicly and share my story publicly.
And then having a friend working at Planned Parenthood saying, "Come aboard. We need your voice." There was just no stopping you. There's no reason to stop. In your mind.
Yeah.
Did you go to college?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
What did you go to school for?
I went to school for women's studies. Surprise, surprise.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah. And I double majored in women's studies and Latin American studies, and then I minored in LGBT studies.
Okay. Because I was expecting you to say political science.
Poli-sci. Yeah. Everyone thinks that.
I know. Where did the politics come in? Like, you graduated with a degree or two.
Yep.
And then what did you do out of school?
Well, I got some job offers to work on campaigns while I was still in school. So I helped to manage. I wasn't the full-time campaign manager, but I was kind of a co-manager of my dear friend Jonathan Brostoff's campaign, and he's now in the state legislature in Wisconsin. And then I also worked in the field as a field organizer for Planned Parenthood's campaign when they were working on behalf of Mary Burke, who ran for governor against Scott Walker, and sadly she lost. But so I did have campaign opportunities when I was still in school and just out of school that really launched my career in politics, and it really helped me marry the two ideas that, okay, I can be an activist and I can care about social justice or, women's health or, LGBT issues. And then I can find a job, working for candidates or working on, as part of a nonprofit to make those social justice issues a part of my work, and also something that, hey, I could get paid for, and this could be my life.
So you have kind of a parallel path of have you done some volunteer work in terms of the campaigns, or has that all been paid?
A lot of it was volunteer.
Okay.
A lot, yeah.
Now in more recent years, you're doing more paid political work, but then you're also coupling that with something that you feel very passionate about, the pro-choice movement. And there's not a conflict that you've never been asked. Like, it never occurred to me that someone who's working on a political campaign might have such a strong opinion, but a strong dedication towards something that could be very, not volatile, but very
polarizing.
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly the word. Polarizing.
Yeah.
Within their own party, within both parties. That hasn't been an issue?
No, it hasn't been an issue for me. I mean, I'm glad you asked, because I think it certainly can be. It's a tricky area. I know that abortion is a sensitive subject for people, even for people who identify as pro-choice. We don't always agree on all of the details. And certainly it's something that's very emotional for people. Even when we do agree on it, it's not something that everyone wants to talk about or wants to be a central component in their, their campaign or their legislative strategy or, whatever it is that they're working on. So it's an issue that I know that it's not going to be the focus of every job that I do, but it's always in the background guiding me. And
no one's ever asked you to not pursue that work, that line of work, or to try to silence you in that way?
No.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very fortunate to have worked either with nonprofits like NARAL Pro-Choice Washington or Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin that, their mission is explicitly around reproductive justice, of course. But then the other work that I've done, whether it's volunteer or whether it's compensated work, has always been for organizations or people who are pro-choice, and they support that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. What brought you out to Seattle?
Gosh.
What?
Well, is it lame if I say that I came out here for a boy?
No, it's not lame at all.
That and job opportunities.
Okay, you wouldn't be the first person to have
kind of
moved.
Mixed, yeah.
Who had moved because of a boy, for sure. And I'm sure not the first person on this podcast too, with that. So you moved out. You had a boyfriend at the time who moved out here. Was he already living here?
Yeah, he was living here. Yeah, and I had graduated and wasn't finding a lot of opportunities in Wisconsin, and thought, gosh, Seattle sounds really tempting. There are a lot of progressive organizations there. It seems to fit my values, and it just seemed like it was a place with a lot of opportunity.
Yeah. What was your first job out here?
NARAL Pro-Choice Washington.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long were you there?
I was there for, it was a little under 2 years.
And from there?
Then after that job, I got hired as the executive director of the King County Democrats, which is now my infamous
it is
moment in Seattle media and press.
Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why we're here today, also, I'll point that out to listeners. Our mutual friend, Mona Das, who has also been on the podcast, had put us in touch. I think shortly after I talked to her, she said, "Oh my gosh, you have to talk to Natalia. You have to have her on the podcast. She would be great." And we've been trying to connect for months. And between my travel schedule and your busy schedule, it's been difficult to connect. And then after the events of last week, the Kavanaugh debacle, I'm not quite sure what to call it, but the Kavanaugh
tragedy.
Yeah, tragedy. Yeah, issue. I reached out to you again, and I was like, okay, let's really try to make this happen, because we just have to talk about this stuff for sure. And I do want to give a plug to Mona as well, because she's running for state senate for the 47th district here in Washington State. So go, Mona. Yeah. Oh, and you know what? Should we mention her opponent right now? I will.
I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah, that's okay. Her opponent is Joe Fain, and he was recently accused of rape. And so not unlike the Kavanaugh situation, and I think it was actual rape, not an attempted rape. And, of course, there's also all sorts of stuff going on right now in the media. People can easily read about that, but that's who Mona's opponent is at this point. So, I just wish her well for even more reasons, not only because she's a person of color who's running, and a woman who I'm so excited about that she's so charged up. She's a fabulous advocate and woman, and just an amazing person. So I wish her luck, but I had to just bring that up as
good
well.
Luck, Mona.
So yeah, good luck. Anyway, so that's what brought us together. And as I said, after this thing that happened last week, this tragedy that happened last week, I am ballistic. I've got a fire going like I haven't had in a while. I mean, I've had a fire going, for 2 years, but I am really motivated to chat about this stuff and to talk to more women for the podcast. We just have to have conversations about it. Like that's what we need to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
We just need to talk about these kinds of things. So let's talk about your time at the King County Democrats office. How long were you there?
I was only executive director for about 5 months.
Oh my goodness.
It was such a short period of time. I got hired maybe I started September 1st, 2017.
Mm-hmm. Who hired you?
Bailey Stober, he was the chair at the time.
Okay, so he actually did the hiring.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And then let's just get out in the open what exactly happened, and then I want to go kind of back in time, and I've got some specific questions about that. If anybody Googles it, what they're going to find is that he had accusations against him by you of all sorts of harassment things that were going on, and ultimately lost his position as the director of the King County Democrats, and then ultimately also lost his job at the King County Assessor's Office. Is that right? Yeah. So ultimately lost that as well. And some of the things that have been written, and, warning for anyone with sensitive ears or they're listening with children, but some of the things that I had read about this is that you had been called a stupid cunt. You'd been called a stupid bitch by him. You'd been invited out, to go drinking with him, and you declined. And this all, now I'm learning, I didn't realize it happened over a very short period of time. So can you talk about that environment and kind of the things that come to my mind are, how quickly did that start? Was it day 2, 2 months in, a month in? Like what happened? How did that all unfold?
Yeah. Well, so before we dive in, I do want to make a quick plug to King County Democrats currently, because they are now doing amazing work. I have several dear friends who, since the debacle happened, they stepped into leadership roles, and they're doing a really good job now. So I just want to put that out there, because this is a really challenging thing for me to talk about, and there's a lot of negativity around it. But I want everyone listening to know that King County Democrats is a great organization, and they are doing good work now, and that, any organization can fall subject to a bad apple. And I really think that that's the crux of what happened to me more than anything, is when you've got one person with too much power and not enough maturity, who's also very charismatic, they can do a lot of damage to an organization and to the individual people in the organization.
How long was he there?
He had only been chair for about a year. He's 25 or 26 years old. So we're talking about a very young chair. He was the youngest chair in county party history. And he had only been serving for, I think, less than a year he'd only been serving for 8 months when he hired me. So he, I don't think, was the most mature person for the role, and certainly not somebody who had the experience to know how to hire a staff person and how to treat a staff person with respect and dignity.
I'm sitting here with my mouth open because I had no idea he was so young. Mm-hmm. It's astounding to me that he was even in that position. That's what I think I'm so shocked by, because I had imagined a 55, 60-year-old man who was running the office and being so rude, to put it lightly. But a young kid, basically a young kid running the office, and just from the get-go, mm-hmm. treating you poorly.
Correct. Yeah.
Having absolutely no idea as to how bad the behavior was.
I can't put words in his mouth. I don't know what he thought about his behavior. I know that there were times where it felt like a kind of a frat environment where, I had fun, and some of the other volunteers, we had fun. We did go out, for meals and drinks together, and sometimes it was great. And then there were other times where he pushed it way too far and would pour my glass of water out on the ground and say, water's for quitters. I'm going to order you another shot or another beer. That kind of fraternity behavior, which, again, these things are complicated. And that's part of why it was so hard for me to talk about this, because you want to acknowledge that there's gray area. And at first, when I started the job, I thought, well, he's kind of young, he's kind of immature, but he seems friendly. He wants to be social with me. That's great. Okay, great. Let's have some fun. And then it was probably about 2 months in that things just started getting so toxic that
how
it started to have an effect.
old were you at the time?
29, 30.
Okay, so a few years older than him. Okay. And then, how long was it before it started to really get toxic?
It was a couple months in when I really got sick of it, and the behavior that had started out as kind of fun, and I'm totally welcome to, going out and having a few drinks is not a bad thing in my opinion. It can be nice to socialize with coworkers.
Sure.
But yeah, after a couple months, it just got so bad that I thought, this isn't healthy. And that's when my friends and my boyfriend started noticing that I was really stressed all the time, and that I was being pulled in all these different directions, and that, my boss was he was just making life really hard for me to be professional and also satisfy his desire to act like a 25-year-old guy.
Yeah. Was it happening to other women in the office as well? That same kind of behavior?
Yes. So his behavior affected lots and lots and lots of people, and several of them who I've talked to personally, they asked not to be involved in the trial and all of the things that happened afterwards. And I've done my best to protect them from the media and not out their stories. So I don't want to go into a lot of details.
It wasn't like you were targeted.
No, I don't think so. I think that this was somebody who enjoyed having a lot of power, social power over people, and enjoyed pressuring other people to drink and kind of being the person in charge. I don't feel like I was specifically targeted. Perhaps I was only by default because I was the only employee. So I was the only person with whom his behavior had that inherent power dynamic. Everyone else was simply volunteers for the organization. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think that the level of inappropriateness with me is much more heightened, because you should never treat a paid employee, a staff person, the way that I was treated, because my job depended on it. Mm-hmm. Everyone else could have walked away, But he did treat a lot of other people as poorly as he treated me.
Mm-hmm. So your friends and your boyfriend noticed that your stress level was increasing, and did they approach you about it and talk to you about it? What did they say?
Yeah, I have a lot of really wonderful people in my life who are very supportive, and a lot of folks just encouraged me to quit. They really thought that this job was becoming unhealthy for me and that I should quit. And in my head, I was thinking, I just got to do 1 year because I want this on my resume for 1 year. And it's a very tempting thing to be an executive director at the age of 29. Not many women get that title that early. And I felt like I would be letting myself down if I didn't try to stick it out, because it was a really good opportunity in a lot of ways, but a wasted opportunity ultimately.
When we conversed before we started recording, you had mentioned that you were actually kind of outed in a way, that it wasn't your choice necessarily to come forward about this. What were the circumstances that led up to that?
Yeah, so the whole debacle started when an anonymous complaint was filed with King County Democrats. It was filed to the vice chairs, of which there were 4 that served underneath Bailey Stober. And the anonymous complaint was a code of conduct complaint that was filed on my behalf, but without my knowledge. And the person who filed that complaint was somebody who I had spoken to about how bad things were. And she was very concerned about, I now know who the person was, but I didn't at the time. And she's a dear friend, and I'm very grateful that she did that. But at the time, it really hit me like a ton of bricks. This anonymous complaint about, my being abused and mistreated at work was filed, and it just came out of left field for me. I didn't know that anyone was going to do that. I didn't know who had done it at the time. And then a couple days after the complaint was filed, I was then fired from my job.
By Bailey.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So it was a rough few days, but it gives me a lot of...
He knew about the filing.
He denies that he knew about it.
So it was just a coincidence that you got fired, according to him. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems really obvious. And it seems like just another immature move, not to address it in a mature fashion.
Yeah.
He initially denied anything that had taken place.
Mm-hmm.
I had read about that online, that he initially denied all of that. What transpired after that complaint got filed?
Well, it was about 4 or 5 months a process after that point where I didn't have a job, and it took my entire life away from me. Every day I had to work on my case, and there wasn't an official legal case. So all of the dispute resolution and the trial happened within the bylaws of the King County Democrats. So the Democratic Party, has local party organizations, and the same as the Republicans, they also have legislative district party organizations and county party organizations. And all these organizations are run in accordance with their own bylaws. And so conflict management and, rules and all of that is decided by the body democratically. The problem is that there wasn't a precedent for this ever happening. There had never been a paid employee like this before. I think the previous paid employees had also been the chairs in the past if they decided to take a salary. So there had never been a power dynamic where a chair hired someone.
A volunteer chair in Bailey had hired you as an employee, kind of working underneath him.
Mm-hmm, okay. Correct, yeah. So there was no precedence. And so it was a very confusing process. And I opened myself up to a lot more abuse and mistreatment during the process, because here I had, at this point, me and this person were in a public conflict, and he leaked stuff to the press.
About what?
He leaked the story to the press in the first place about firing me and tried to spin it from his angle to embarrass me. He also went on a conservative talk radio show, which, if you're the chair of the King County Democrats, I don't know why you do that. But he went on a conservative talk radio show and, talked about what a horrible employee I was. And it was just, it was really, really painful. It was all very public. There are lots of articles about it. Erica C. Barnett, who's an independent journalist, she writes The C is for Crank. She covered it extensively. And if anyone is interested to see how this saga played out, I would recommend reading her articles on it.
I'll look that up and link it to it in the show notes.
But it's suffice to say, it all took much longer than I ever imagined something like this could take, mostly because there weren't processes in place to handle code of conduct or harassment complaints. And that's why I think it's so important that we're talking about this right now, is that the whole Me Too movement has just blown a big lid off of all of the harassment that happens, from the tiniest indiscretions to to the worst things like assault that happen to women every day. And it's not always of a sexual nature. In my case, my boss didn't abuse me sexually, but he used loaded comments about me being a bitch or a cunt, and about me being a slut and things like that.
Were those made in jest? And I'm not excusing them at all, but I'm just wondering what the context was.
Mostly jest. There were a couple times where it was clearly not in jest. Yeah. And it's never okay to call your employee that,
No, it's not. And I know I'm not excusing it at all. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. Are you out drinking? And again, not blaming the victim for anybody. Please don't read into this, but I'm just trying to understand how those words could even come out of somebody's mouth in a work environment, or even, even in a party environment, or, if you go out for drinks or something and it's like, oh, that's stupid bitch, can't do anything or whatever. Or is it just pouring over spreadsheets and it's coming out that way? But so it was a combination of things.
Definitely a combination. Yeah. And I think it's important that we talk about these things, because we need to have processes in place to handle them. And I know, one of your previous guests, Allison, she had been harassed on a plane, and then the Delta flight attendants, they had no context from which to draw, from how to deal with that. And the same thing happened, King County Democrats is full of some really, really hardworking people who are committed to the political process, and they volunteer hundreds of hours of their time to do incredible work. But if we don't have something in the bylaws that says, hey, this is how you handle a complaint, then they're going to fall short. It's not their fault. It's just nobody can handle these crises when they're in the middle of one. And that's why we as a culture should demand that people acknowledge that this stuff happens, and then we should support victims when they come forward and blow the whistle on someone.
What was making you reluctant to come forward?
Gosh, I don't even know if I have a single answer for that. So many things. I mean, first and foremost, that I'm really committed to the work. And at the time I thought, well, if I make a big deal out of this, then that story is going to get all of the attention versus all of the volunteer work that we're doing to support progressive candidates. And I didn't want to take the attention away from the goal. But ultimately, that ended up happening anyways, because Bailey spoke to the press and kind of spread the story around a lot. So that ended up happening anyways. I'm also just not, I don't love conflict. I'd rather settle things in a face-to-face, honest way than blow them up and make a big dramatic deal out of it. But what I learned from this experience is sometimes you don't get a choice.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're involved in those things anyways.
But you're also in politics, where that is, I don't think it's a new thing, but that is how things have to take place, right? Very publicly, in order for anybody to pay attention or anything to happen. In retrospect, it's easy to say that, like, oh, look at the outcome of this, organization, the King County Democrats, is moving forward as a result of this. But I know that certainly wasn't on your mind at the time.
Yeah,
that it was going to move the organization forward.
I certainly didn't think it would. And I think that it caused a lot of people a lot of discomfort. But the organization is doing an amazing job now, and they are doing great work. And I also think, again, anytime something like this happens, whether it's in a nonprofit, or it happens to someone in public office, or it happens at a big corporation like Uber, it's going to be uncomfortable, but ultimately it's for the best that we move forward as a culture and learn how to handle issues of abuse, harassment in the workplace, and sexual assault.
Do you think with the Kavanaugh-Ford debacle, do you think that more women will feel empowered to come forward? Or do you think that they're just going to think like, fuck it, it doesn't matter? That's because that is like the feeling, is that really, she was poised. She went through all of this, and still, it doesn't matter. Does it matter?
Absolutely, it matters. I can see how some people would be really discouraged by what they just saw play out on the national stage. But it matters so much, because she did get up there, and her image of speaking on that stage and being as poised as she was and as strong as she was, that's burned into my memory. And also the conversation that she sparked around, why women don't report, why victims of any gender don't report. The conversation around, what counts as a credible or reliable witness, and that Sometimes folks don't remember every detail, but that doesn't mean that they're not credible. I think that she opened the door to a lot of nuanced conversations about what it means to share your story that people were not having before. And now we're really digging in deep to those conversations, which I think is a positive thing.
Do you think we'll have another wave of Me Too in the coming months?
I don't even think of it in terms of waves anymore. I just think it's just like one big tsunami that just never stops.
Keeps coming.
Yeah, that's what's amazing. I really do think that, conservatives or folks who didn't really like the Me Too movement, I don't know what I'd call them, anti-Me Tooers, not me's. I think they thought this was a wave, and it has not stopped for 2 years. It's not a fad. And unfortunately, that's because it's all too common for women and victims of all genders to have these stories.
I think that every single one of us has been a victim of one way or another. Maybe victim is too strong in some instances. And by that, I mean, we've all walked down the street. We've all been whistled at. We've all heard comments. We've all felt a little threatened. It's been part of me. And I didn't even realize it. And I'll tell a quick story here. I've traveled all over the world, and I have been safe. Like, I haven't had anything happen to me in my travels. But I'm also super cautious, and I listen to my gut, and I watch what I'm doing, and don't go down dark alleys, and I miss opportunities because I don't take some risks. I absolutely realize that. And I'm a runner as well, and so sometimes I'll run. And it might be at dusk, and I'm very aware of, like, somebody in the bushes. What could somebody pop out from behind a car? It's an awareness that I have, and I've always had it. And I read an article in Runner's World a couple of years ago from Peter Sagal, who's also an NPR host, and he's a runner, and so he wrote this article about his woman friend who was running, who had explained to him how she has to be so vigilant when she goes out for a run. And he was floored. He had no idea that was the case. And I gave the article to John, and I said, it was so ingrained in me that I didn't know. I just thought everybody was like that. I just thought that that's the way the world ran. And then I was like, oh my gosh, this guy has no idea. And then I showed it to John, and he was like, what? Like, he didn't have any idea. And now with all of this stuff that's come out, John, God bless him, is just like, I'm so sorry. He's just always apologizing. I'm so sorry that we, the male race, are like
on behalf of his gender. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Because he just didn't realize. And honestly, until I read that article, that was the first time the light had been shed on me that I was behaving any differently than the other gender, that I just had to be more aware. And then when the whole Me Too thing came out, I was like, wow, all of those times that I have been put in that position, and it's all, never been raped, never been assaulted, but certainly the comments and by men of power in jobs that I've had. And all of those faces come back to me, and I remember them. I remember what an asshole this manager was, or this one. And I can only imagine what this is doing to people who have been the victims of sexual assault. It's got to be ripping everybody wide open. I absolutely realize that. Anyway, I'm going on a little tirade here. that I realize that there is not. This is my point. There is not a woman that hasn't been the recipient, the target of something like that. So I cannot understand. Please help me understand how a woman can stand up in support of Kavanaugh, or to blame the victim, or to say that it's not true.
Oh my gosh.
Tell me. That's why you're here.
Yeah. Well, for starters, gosh, if only I had a degree in like Republican psychology. My gosh. No, I think that there are a lot of women who they fear for the men in their life more than they fear for the potential of someone getting accused falsely, more than they fear the reality, which is that all of us have been harassed. I don't understand that. I think it's really a question of fearing the potential for harm versus the actual harm that happens to women every damn day. I don't understand it.
Do you think part of it is in defense of the person that they're standing by?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Look, a lot of women on the left gave Kavanaugh's wife a hard time. I saw a lot of cruel memes on the internet, but let's be real. If you're married to someone and you had no idea, you had never heard of them hurting someone before, you're going to stand by your husband. I don't think that we can expect every woman to come around on every single accusation, but I certainly wish that there were more concern about the real safety of women in real time, women and trans folks in real time, than there is about the potential for some white dude getting accused of something he didn't do. I just think when you weigh those two things out, and I'm like moving my hands up and down right now in the universal language for the scale. When you weigh those two things against each other, I don't understand how you could be more concerned about the potential for a false accusation over an actual assault that happened.
I did have someone post on my Facebook page that they were concerned about Kavanaugh's daughters and what this was doing to his daughters.
Oh, gosh.
That he was being dragged through the dirt. And I don't know where that came from. I'm assuming it's Fox News because I don't know anybody who would conjure that up in their mind that was the big issue, is that what this what this could possibly do to the daughters. And I just thought, I'm astounded by that.
Well, that's kind of a red herring, and that's what Fox News does. Is
of course
they distract and distract and distract.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, actually, I think one of the reasons why so many women stand by Brett Kavanaugh and his appointment to the Supreme Court is because they identify as pro-life. And for a lot of people, that is it. That is the only political issue they care about. It doesn't matter who the person is or what they've done. I mean, look at how Trump got elected.
So single issue voters, and everything else is blind. They're blinded by everything else. And look, I think we can be like that too. I think Democrats can be like that too. I think women can be like that too. I think white women can be like that too.
Yeah.
I think I think we all are like that. That we see someone. It doesn't even have to be in politics. It can be our partner. It can be our friend. It can be anything. And we see this person as one dimensional. And if we hear something, I mean, Clinton is a great, is a really good example of that. And I'm talking about Bill Clinton.
Oh,
right. So, but we can see, and Hillary too. We look at one aspect, and we're so driven about that the other things just fall away, and we don't put weight in those, and we don't believe those, and we think, well, that was just that one incident, so it's okay. And so I try to look at it from that perspective of, okay, so maybe that was one drunken incident, but everything else that he's done,
right.
That's a thing. But
right.
But in the instance of Kavanaugh, he was just such an ass on the
he behaved. I mean, his behavior was inexcusable.
Yes,
yeah. No, I think you make a really good point, and I just want to go back and highlight that, because I think you're absolutely right that people on every end of the political spectrum are guilty of getting tunnel vision and just focusing on one issue, or in some cases one incident, or they're just going to focus on the thing that reaffirms what they already believe, and they're not interested in being challenged by complex narratives that go against that. And that is so important to remember as we go through this really challenging time for our country and our culture, that we should be open to complex narratives and challenging ourselves to listen to others. And, as hard as it is to listen to people who disagree with you.
Absolutely. I want to read you something here. I was texting with a friend of mine, and she's actually been on the podcast, Linda Fain. She's a Buddhist teacher. And I had asked her if she would come back, because I've had her as a recurring guest, and we talk about different topics. And I'd asked her if she wanted to come back so that we could talk about this kind of thing. And she said, all I can say is that we conflate moral issues with political issues. People don't stand up for what is good or right because they want to avoid being political. Those are two different things. I thought that was a really interesting perspective, that we have to remember that there is a difference between politics, that there is politics, and then that there is good and right. And we just have to remember, we just have to be kind of laser focused on that. And I think, and that's not saying that what happened was good or right, But I just think in general, that's a really good way to look at it, is that are we being kind? Are we being compassionate? Are we doing really what's in, is it right to tear kids, from their families, tear kids away from their families? It's probably, I don't think that's right.
Yeah.
That's not a political issue.
Yeah.
That's just, whether it's right or wrong. And I think if we can look at things through that lens, I think we'd all be a lot better off. And I just think that was a really nice perspective for me to hear from her, and then just kind of be able to remember that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, the path that this conversation took is really reminding me of another organization that I work with. I'm currently serving on the board, but I've been a speaker for them for years and done, volunteer work and some programming with them. And they're called Exhale Pro-Voice. So it sounds like pro-choice, but it's not choice, it's pro-voice. They do work around abortion story sharing through a philosophy that they've kind of created, and a model of listening to folks and kind of like leaving your pro-choice or pro-life identity at the door and opening yourself up to conversations that obstruct that polarizing narrative, and find common ground. And I think you'd be really interested in them. So they started, I want to say almost 20 years ago, maybe 16 or 18 years ago, started off as a hotline for folks who'd had abortions to call and talk with a counselor. And at that time, there were lots of hotlines all over the country, but most of them were sponsored by churches or religious organizations, and they wanted you to kind of have a come to Jesus moment at the end. And Exhale was formed to say, nope, we want to have, or sometimes there were hotlines that were from the pro-choice community, and they weren't particularly accepting of people's narratives that maybe involved like grief or sadness. So you had two sides of this debate, both approaching women who'd had abortions with like a really like tunnel vision, like, your story has to be two-dimensional and it has to fit our narrative, otherwise we won't help you. And so Exhale was founded, and they started doing the hotline in a way that they called pro-voice, which meant that they would listen to anyone's story and not try to push their beliefs on them, not say, oh, you should feel relief or, oh, you should feel regret. And that it kind of blossomed into a whole philosophy. And in the years since, they've done lots of workshops, speaking programs, we've toured around colleges, and all of it is around the idea of getting out of that tunnel vision, getting out of that thing that tells you that your politics is your morality, or that, a political word like pro-choice can define your morality, or a word like pro-life can define your morality, because it can't. I mean, I find so often that when I actually talk to people about reproductive rights issues, if I can get them to get away from the titles and those, the catchphrases, we usually have a lot more in common than not. And I think that, I was just thinking about what you said that was so profound about the quote that you shared from your friend. I'm sorry, I forgot her name.
Yeah, Linda.
Yeah, Linda. But just that, your politics do not represent your morality. If your morality is around loving people and trying to understand people and being kind and empathetic, then, then it doesn't really matter what you call yourself.
What do you think will happen? Is there talk in your community that Roe v. Wade might be overturned?
Yes, there is. And there has been ever since Donald Trump got elected. For, folks who are just kind of confronting that for the first time this week, I apologize. It's a really big Band-Aid to rip off really quickly. I've been dealing with that possibility for a couple of years now, and it still hurts. It still sucks. But yeah, they could bring a new case to the Supreme Court, and the court could judge on it, effectively overturning Roe v. What the court can't do is they can't just go pick an old case and just say, let's vote on it tomorrow and overturn it. But they'd need a new case to come to the court kind of from the ground up. And
what kind of case?
I mean, I imagine it would have to be a case where it would probably have to feature another woman who has an abortion who is willing to sue for, wrongful death or something like that. I imagine, would
it be a husband, boyfriend?
It could be, or it could be, it could be a case where the woman felt like she was coerced. Or it could be a case where a partner says, "Oh, you had an abortion and that was murder of my child." It could be one of those two things. It could be something else. I'm not a lawyer, so this is a little outside of my expertise, but that's what I imagine it happening.
Has anything like that come close in the last? When did Roe v. Wade?
1973.
Okay, and nothing has come close since 1973.
Not to my knowledge, no. Mostly what they've done is at the state level, judges have ruled in favor of laws that restrict access to abortion but I don't think that they've ever tried to overturn it, at the national level. But what's interesting is that, so every state is different. And if Roe v. Wade is overturned at the national level, every state will have a different set of laws that will be applied. There are some states that have no laws regarding abortion, meaning that, they never passed anything protecting or, denouncing it before 1973 when national precedent took over. There are some states like Washington where abortion is not only legal, but it was reaffirmed legislatively.
Does that mean that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, that it would still be legal in Washington State?
Yes, absolutely correct.
Okay.
So there are a number of states, and gosh, I should have done my refresher research before I came here. But there's a handful, I want to say like 7 or 8 maybe, that have laws on the books saying that abortion is legal. So when Roe v. Wade is overturned, you will still be able to access abortion in those states. New York is one of them. Washington is one of them. I think Oregon, Massachusetts maybe, and a few others where it will still be legal. And what we're going to have to do then as a movement, as feminists and as women, as pro-choice women, we're going to have to make sure that while we're focusing on the national fight to regain the privilege and the right to have an abortion, we're also really going to want to bolster support in those states. What I think is going to happen is that when people need abortions and they're only legal in a few states, there's going to be essentially a reproductive healthcare tourism market where people will need to travel. They'll need to buy airfare. They'll need to find temporary housing. They'll need to find childcare for their existing children. Remember, over 50% of women who access abortions are already mothers, meaning they already have at least one child. So this is a choice that mothers make in order to be a better parent and to care for their existing children. So they'll need childcare. We're really going to need to figure out creative ways to support those people who are going to have to go a lot longer distance, and they're going to have to pay a lot more money and do a really scary thing like travel across the country to get the healthcare that they need. So this week has been tough. I've been mourning, I've been sad, I've been crying a lot, but I'm also starting to think really clearly. And again, I am guided by that anger. That's fueling me right now pretty hard. And I'm trying to think as clearly as I possibly can about what are next steps. What are we going to do to support people who need abortion care if and when Roe v. Wade is overturned? And luckily here in Washington, there's a lot we can do because we are arguably the state where abortion is the safest. It was passed by a referendum, so by a vote of the people in Washington state, that abortion should be legal. And then about 10 years after it was first passed, it was then reaffirmed, and the right to abortion care was extended to people who get some kind of state subsidized health care. So in Washington, we've said twice, loudly and clearly, we want abortion to be legal here. So it would be very hard for them to take it away from us here.
Are there other states that are now trying to implement something quickly to protect themselves against a potential overturn of Roe v. Wade?
That is a good question. I don't know the answer. My guess would be no, because in the last several years, we've seen a lot of governors and attorneys general flip from blue to red in a lot of states. And of course, there have been a lot of cases of state gerrymandering in favor of the Republican candidates. So the farther down the ballot you go, the more local you get, the more it's likely that things are controlled by Republicans and most of the time by white men. So my guess would be no, but I don't know. And that's a really, really interesting question. I'd love to know if there are states that are figuring out a strategic plan for how to move forward.
You're really passionate.
Yeah.
You're really passionate about these topics.
Yeah, I am.
and you don't seem like you're fueled by anger, though. You don't.
It's a calm facade. It's
yeah.
taken me like 13 years to get a handle on that.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah.
Because you don't seem, really, you seem determined. You don't seem angry.
I'm very angry. But thank you. You gotta figure out how to keep cool through these situations.
How do you keep cool? What's changed for you in the last 13 years that's helped you kind of stay a little bit more even about it?
Well, I'll just put it all out there. I started taking antidepressants this year, and that's been amazing for me. And I waited way too long because there's a lot of stigma about getting treatment for mental health issues. And so I waited till I was 31 years old. So those are helping a lot. And I'm really happy with that choice that I made to take care of myself.
In looking back, when do you think you should have been on it? How long were you feeling depressed?
Oh gosh, I should have been on them.
Was it like
over a decade ago?
Oh, okay. It wasn't November 9th or whatever that date is.
I mean, that was a big part of it too. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's interesting. It's I've talked to a lot of friends who've opened themselves up to therapy and mental health treatment in the last 2 years because of what we're all going through collectively. So I think that's really cool. You know, sometimes people talk about self-care and they say, oh, you need self-care. And they really mean like, oh, you should get a manicure or something like that.
Or a massage.
Yeah. And while that's great, and I don't want to take that away from people who that helps, that doesn't help me feel better. But I did finally get on some medication that's really, really making things better. You know, and I think the other thing is just making a plan. I do tend to react with anger to things that upset me, but then moving through the anger and getting to, okay, what are we going to do? That's what keeps me going.
I know, and I'm sure I've talked about this on the podcast before, I know a lot of people who are depressed, angry, of course, but also depressed because of the situation that we're in right now. And I think a lot of it is just, it's from both sides, right? Just because there's so much divisiveness that's going on that we don't feel connected. And social media isn't helping because it's just a way to spout off your anger to the people who agree with you for the most part, except for some people, you know, on Facebook.
So true.
Yeah.
So true.
But I do know people who are really quite depressed and are, you know, who are seeking help for it. You know, one of the things that I've done and that's really kind of helped me because I feel like I have to move forward with my life and I have to continue the podcast and I have to continue the tours and the business that I run. I shut most of the news off. Because otherwise, I end up being unproductive. And that's exactly what happened last week. You know, I was emboldened for sure by looking at some of the videos. I came across the Kamala Harris video. She's
awesome.
And the senator from Hawaii, whose name I can't.
Is that Tammy Duckworth?
No, Hitomi.
Oh, okay.
I think that's her name. I think it's a Japanese name, but senator from Hawaii and 2 men, but it was Kamala Harris that I was like, go woman. Oh my God. So I got pulled into that and I thought I just wasted a day, you know, and I run my own business, right? So, I don't get paid basically if I'm not running my business. But I just realized, boy, that was really unproductive. I have to go back to work, but I am fired up, like I said earlier, just like to do something, to figure something out, to help people get the, you know, at the very least, get the word out. And I'm leaving town, as you know, for a month and I have my voter ballot. I'm so excited. I got it sent to me early. Good. Because I won't be here when it should arrive and I'll be back after the election. But, I'm not sure if I'm happy that I'm going to be gone or I wish I was out marching. I wish I could do something with the energy and go do something with it, but I can't.
Well, when do you get back?
November 8th.
Oh, well, so you'll still be here for a lot of the hoorah.
Well, for the hurrah, but the election's right on the 6th, right? Yeah. Well, let's hope it's hurrah.
Yeah.
Let's hope.
I think it will be. No, I have a good feeling about this one.
Are there things that are going on right now, just in terms of marches and any events that are happening in Seattle to get specifically women, just to get women out and get us heard? Allow us to be heard.
One of the things that I do is I'm part of a group on Facebook that's a reproductive rights happy hour Seattle, and that's what it's called, Repro Rights Happy Hour. And it's a monthly happy hour where women in Seattle can come together and just talk about it's kind of an inherently political group, but it doesn't have to be. You know, sometimes we just end up talking about our cats for a really long time. But it's really, for me, it's very therapeutic to get out and just have a margarita with some other ladies who are also feeling the same things that I'm feeling, the same frustrations. For me, it's not even that I have to talk about Kavanaugh or what Trump said every single day, but it's very healing to be around other women who are also cued into what's going on and they're just as angry as I am, because then I don't feel like I'm as alone. And in terms of, you know, activism, there's so much. I usually go to the Strangers page. It's called Stranger Things to Do, and they have a drop down where you can actually click, you know, civic and activism.
No kidding. I had no idea.
They have a whole calendar of events for King County. But the fact that you can tailor it to just looking at the kind of civic, political, and activism related events, I always check that. I have the app on my phone. It's great. Yeah. And then the Repro Health Happy Hour Seattle is really great. I also, I tend to follow the Indivisible groups. Indivisible Seattle is still going strong.
Oh, it is. Good.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what they're up to right now. I wish I can't think of any specific event to plug, but I do love the work that they do, and I think that they're doing a great job.
Yeah. I'll link to those in the show notes. And if there's anything else that you come up with in the meantime, I can always just link to it later. No problem at all.
Well, and I'd also like to plug, if anybody, if anybody's interest was piqued about the work I was doing with Exhale Pro Voice, we are doing our annual fundraiser. So if anyone wants to donate to a hotline that, helps women talk about their abortion experiences at no charge, you should do that.
Great,
or you can also look at the Pro Voice resources on their website, which is exhaleprovoice.org. And they have conversation guides and a lot of really, really great information and a lot of great tools around talking around difficult subjects and kind of breaching the divide on the abortion stuff.
Where does your sister live?
Oh, my whole family's still back in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Is your sister as bold as you are?
Oh, hell yes, she is. I hope she listens to this. She's amazing. And she has a beautiful son and daughter. My niece and nephew are incredible. And she's raising them along with her husband to be little badasses themselves. I think they're all very bold.
And where do you think your self-confidence came from? Did that just really develop over time? You're laughing because you don't feel like you have self-confidence?
No, I do. I mean, I do now. I just think that's a hard question to answer. I was very, very shy as a kid. And I think it came from, again, I hate to use the same answer, but anger and feeling driven to want to make a change in the world. I get very upset when I feel like something unjust is happening. And I find it's really hard for me to not turn that anger into action somehow. And I think that's where my confidence has come from over time. Because I certainly wasn't a super outspoken kid, that's for sure.
But there's lots of, and I think the reason why I've kind of coming back to that again is, and maybe trying to ask it in a different way, is that lots of us are angry. Lots of us are outraged. And I'm not even talking about the last couple of years. I'm just talking about there are lots of things to be upset about. We can conjure up a lot of things to be upset about, but that doesn't motivate us into action. So there was something about that attracted you to politics, because I'm repelled by it, frankly, because I don't understand how someone could be so political. You know what I mean? Like literally that you're jostling for a position and you're manipulating and you are looking at all angles and you're trying to figure out how you can manipulate someone to do something. Like you wouldn't disagree with that, right?
No,
that's what politics is all about.
Yeah.
Trading favors and that sort of thing. But that doesn't repel you. You're kind of drawn into that, it seems like, and trying to work within the system.
Yeah. Yeah. Working within the system there's trade-offs to it, of course. But I think if we strip away the presumed value that a word like manipulation has, if you strip away like the negative intonation of it, that is essentially what politics is. If somebody wants to vote on a piece of legislation to make, all brown-eyed 31-year-old women, have to work extra hard to earn the same pay as someone else, that's going to be personal to me because I'm a brown-eyed 31-year-old woman. And so then I'm going to try to speak to that person and change their mind because that legislation, I can see that it's not good for me. And so I'm going to try to manipulate them and change their mind and have them come around and not vote for that piece of legislation. That was a horrible example. But no, yeah, politics is about trying to make other people understand your point of view. And if you have insight into something that maybe somebody else doesn't realize because they live a different life than you and they don't understand how this legislation would impact a community that's different from them, then I think it's important to try to change their mind and talk to them about it.
Do you think you can change people's minds?
I do.
You've seen it happen?
I've seen it happen enough. Yeah. I think it's a lot harder to do when we're as divided as we are around labels. Then it makes it so much harder. But I do think it's possible.
Are you tuned into the news, to NPR, to television news, online news? Are you pretty connected with what's going on a daily basis? Yeah,
I pretty much mostly listen to NPR, and I have like my little like news app on my phone that I use as well.
What news app?
It's called Flipboard. Yeah, it pulls from all the sources, so it kind of diversifies what I see.
Are you able to curate it, or is it is truly diversified and you're seeing all sides?
You are able to curate content in terms of topic, but it does pull from news sources that I wouldn't necessarily usually see.
So
out.
BBC, Al Jazeera, Fox,
yeah,
CNN.
It pulls from all over.
Okay.
So I like that I kind of get to see the different headlines and that I get to see other perspectives on there. I think that's really important. Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of people are repulsed by politics, but I also think that once you know, for me, it was like the more I understood how it worked, the deeper I was interested in trying to learn the complex ins and outs of it and figure out how I could make a difference. How I could use a system that's like labyrinthical and complicated. It's inherently exclusive, and I think that's why our political systems are so complicated. It's to discourage people from being involved. And I was like, no, I'm going to get involved.
Well, yeah.
You're not going to stop me.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. That irritates me a lot, but it doesn't irritate me to action. I'm a person who will throw up my hands, when I hear something like that, especially after talking to Mona and kind of hearing what she's been through, in her process of running. I just think, I couldn't be involved in something like that because I just don't get it. It's just.
Yeah. It's not for everyone, that's for sure. But, well, I'm going to totally screw up this quote because I don't remember who said it. But one of my, feminist foremothers said the personal is political. And in my experience, the thing that galvanized me and eventually made me really political was sharing my abortion story. And I think anytime you share a personal story, you are doing a political act. You're doing the inherent original political act. And so if that's what folks want to do and they want to share their stories and speak out about what's happened to them, whether they've been assaulted or they've had an abortion or they've been discriminated because of the color of their skin, if people want to share their stories, I think that's the most political thing they can do. And that doesn't require you to become enmeshed and mired in our political processes, which are not, you're right, they're not for everyone. And it takes a certain kind of person who likes to nerd out on process to actually, want to make a career out of that work.
Yeah, I think is the quote "politics is personal." Is that or is that?
I think it's the personal is political, okay. But I'm not remembering who originally said it.
Okay,
I'll
sure.
remember, of course, the minute I get in my car
okay.
and drive away.
Let me know.
Yeah.
I'll make a note of that in the show notes too. Is there anything else that you want to cover today or you want to chat about or bring up?
Gosh, no, I think you got my life story somehow. So
I
think we covered it all.
Good.
If I could just say one thing to kind of summarize everything, it's that I would really encourage folks in Seattle and Washington to stay vigilant and to share your personal stories, whether you are conservative or liberal. I would encourage you to talk to people in your life and your family and, share your personal stories and why you care about the things you care about. Because the polarization that we're seeing right now, that's destroying our democracy. And I don't think we're going to be able to survive it if it keeps up at this pace forever. We can't keep treating each other like this.
But what does sharing your personal stories, how does that help?
Well, so I'm fascinated by like brain science and stuff. So one of the things that's amazing that happens when you share a personal story and also when you make eye contact with someone and when you touch someone physically is that they get a surge of serotonin and other endorphins in their brain. And that drug actually inspires feelings of trust and safety and empathy. It triggers the empathy center of your brain. And so there's something at the physiological level that happens when you share a story with someone else. I've seen it happen I've been at picket lines where pro-life people were shouting in my face horrible things to me. And when I stopped and said, I had an abortion and this is how I felt about it, it immediately cuts through the narrative. It's like magic. It's like a magic lightsaber that just like cuts through the bullshit. When you, instead of talking about a policy, if you say, oh, well, I struggled with homelessness and this is what it felt like for me when this happened to me. I just think that personal narrative does such an efficient and magical job at getting through the kind of armor that people put around themselves and really gets people to talk about the root of what they're feeling. Why are you upset about politics? Why are you upset about this piece of legislation? Is it because you read about it theoretically, or is it because it connects with something that happened in your life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The reason I ask is that I imagine we're all like so used to telling our stories now, right? So, like kind of outing ourselves on social media. So there's a lot of information out there. But also it just strikes me that a story or an opinion has to be said in just the right way to be effective. And what I'm thinking about is, one of the reasons why I've stayed off of politics for the most part on my Facebook page is that when it comes out of my mouth, it comes out really angry and alienating to other people. I know that. I know that that's how I am. And the crazy thing is that last week I did post something that was more rah-rah. It was the Kamala Harris video. And I was like, yay, go, woman, this is just great. And then I just got cut down, by one person in particular. But yeah, and then a little, snarky fight ensued. And I just took down the post because that's not what I want on my Facebook feed. I want people to feel good. And that's more what I'm about is helping people to feel better about themselves. I want to feel better. I want to encourage other people and other women to feel better about themselves. But I just know myself that by posting things or even telling personal stories, I just feel like the way that it comes out doesn't instill empathy. It just riles people up more. But I think I just have to work on my delivery.
That might be true.
I think that's what it comes down to.
That might very well be true.
Yeah.
And if you, not to overplug it, but Exhale's website, exhaleprovoice.org, has guides on exactly to do exactly what you were just talking about.
How to work on my delivery.
Yeah,
I think I know. I need to take an improv course, so that I can learn how to say things in a funny way that don't rile people up so much.
Well, yeah, humor is great at disarming people too.
Yes, exactly.
I would say, radical empathy can be sparked by like a personal story that kind of disarms people and surprises them, and also by humor. That's another great way to get people talking.
Yeah, I know. As I end these conversations, I ask the guest, what does it mean to you to be bold? Since this is the Be Bold podcast.
That's a great question. To me, being bold means letting myself be uncomfortable and even embracing that being super uncomfortable in order to make positive change for other people.
Tell me where people can find you or where you would suggest people go for more information, either to find you or because it doesn't have to be, we're not here to plug anything specific like a book or whatever that you're doing, unless you should probably write a book. But we're not here to plug that. But if there's any place that you would send people social media wise, website wise, what would that be at the moment that you're working on?
So I would say you can find me on Twitter. I'm at the Femme Natalia. That's Femme, Femme, Natalia, Natalia. And you can also find my work through Exhale Pro Voice. And you can also find me at the Repro Health Happy Hours here in Seattle. And yeah, those are the extracurriculars I'm doing right now.
Excellent. Great.
Yeah.
Natalia, thank you so much for being here. Like I said earlier, we've been trying to get this together for a while, and there just seems, I know I certainly felt the sense of urgency of, like really wanting to have this conversation, and at least, I don't know that there are some action items that people can take for sure after hearing this. But I think the important thing is to hear your story, and just to bring that out in the open, because especially, with the Bailey Stober thing that's happening to women every single day, millions and millions of times a day, this is going on. And if we're not talking about it and we're not standing up for ourselves, for it, then that's a problem. So thank you for standing up for women, even though it wasn't your first choice to actually do that, but it worked out, and it was, really, really helpful, I know, for a lot of women. So thank you for doing that. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a blast.
I really have to give big kudos to Natalia for speaking out on issues she feels so passionate about, and for taking the time to sit down with me. As I said earlier, I think it's so important to get these stories of harassment out in the open so we can all feel more comfortable talking about them, and hopefully little by little, it'll stop this from being acceptable behavior in the workplace. Thanks for being with me today for another episode of the Be Bold podcast. If you have a question about travel, about a previous episode, or about any other random stuff, just let me know. You can call 877-280-5170. I had a lot of fun last week answering Lauren's question and would love to do more of those. So please give me a call. I may just feature you on a future episode. Don't forget to check out the show notes on the BeBoldPodcast.com website. You can also find them on whatever platform you're using to listen to the podcast. You can find out more about me by visiting wanderlustandlipstick.com. Sign up for my newsletter on the Wanderlust and Lipstick site, and you'll receive a series of tips for making your travels safer. As I mentioned earlier, this month I have a giveaway for a Cozy Up jacket from Prana. One winner will be chosen from subscribers to my newsletter, so make sure you're on board to get those details. For now, you can connect with me by friending me on Facebook, and I'm WonderGal on Instagram. I know you're now thinking of joining me for a future tour. Don't forget to check out wandertours.com and the South India tour early next year, or the Papua New Guinea tour next August. Ladies, don't forget to join the Be Bold Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/BeBoldGroup. You're going to love the positivity, encouragement, and support from that community. And while you're online, go to the Be Bold Podcast Facebook page and give that a like. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Be Bold Podcast. Until next time, be bold.